Hi, I'm Autumn,
And I'm Abby.
and you're listening to The Right Angle, the podcast that's more about the process than the product.
We usually talk a lot about writing and storytelling, but today we're exploring a different kind of creativity, the kind that happens behind the scenes.
We're diving into the world of coding and how building software isn't so different from building stories.
And we've brought on a guest who knows all about how logic, structure, and even a little bit of improvisation come into play when you're writing in code.
Logan, we're so excited you're here today.
Before we dive into the big questions, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do?
Yeah, my name is Logan. I'm a computer science major. Computer science comprehensive major is the technical term for it. And so far, I've worked on coding with Python and Java, and we've really done a lot of back-end coding, which is coding to make something work instead of something to look pretty, which is called the front end. But we have dabbled a little bit in it with GUIs, the GUIs, or a graphic user interface.
So, what's your relationship with writing, especially the non coding kind?
I absolutely hate it. It is not something that I enjoy doing, as I just kind of find myself to have a permanent writer's block for reasons I am not fully sure on.
It's very interesting because you're going to be the first guest who we've had on who doesn't enjoy writing,
I don't like writing in the general sense, but I see coding as a form of writing in itself.
which is really interesting. And I think before we get in too deep, we want to make sure everyone who's listening is on the same page.
Yeah, coding can sound super intimidating if you're not already in that world. So, could you give us a quick explanation? What is coding in simple terms?
Coding is you are writing in a semi-human language, I guess is the best way to put it. It is English, but it is in a certain format you have to write it in which the only the machine can learn and know, and it will take that language and it will convert it into binary as zeros and ones, and then it will actually execute said code, which is depending on what language you're using, such as the ones I've used so far, Python and Java, which are fairly simple to learn. It will take that coding in simple terms and it will slowly cipher it into step by step into languages it starts to understand more and more until you get to that binary.
That's super interesting. What kind of things do you code?
So far, we haven't done much personal projects, but essentially, we've done really complex calculators in which you can take user input into the code and it will do whatever you want with it. It really just depends on like, we've done a lot of simple programs, nothing like crazy, and we've messed a lot with object-oriented programming, which is its whole sub-programming kind of deal.
Yeah, so to relate this more to our listeners who may not know much about code, what are some real world things people use every day that do rely on code?
Anything digital, your digital smartwatches, your phones, laptops, anything that uses doesn't even need internet, just any program. So apps on your phone, even Google's a big one, but anything that's computerized has code.
What's your favorite thing so far that you've coded? I know you've said mostly just working on these complex calculators, but is there something specific within those that you particularly enjoy about coding?
More recently, something that I've enjoyed that we've done in class is that we started coding like an Uno game.
Hmm.
We're taking like the very basics of Uno and trying to code it piece by piece. And we're using a lot of that object-oriented programming. You've got your deck in Uno and you've got your cards. And so we take the code and we are turning the card into an object itself. And then we slowly build up from there. And it's been a lot of fun trying to figure out how to get it to work. And we're not fully done with it, but we don't get done with it in class. I'd like to kind of work on that myself outside of class.
That's super cool.
So now that we've got a foundation, let's get into the building blocks structure and logic.
Whether you're writing an epic fantasy novel or designing a sleek app, everything needs an internal system to work. So, what does that internal system look like for you? What process goes into building that?
Well, first you have to kind of create your base file, in which case consists of making a main method, which means all your code is going to work inside of that one file, and you compile and you kind of make break it down piece by piece. You need to make sure that the small things work, and so you figure out step at a time and work one problem and try to figure out how to get that problem to work, and then you get to the next problem and you code that out to get it to work, and then by the end you're trying to make sure all your code is working fluently together with itself.
So it's almost like a step-by-step process that builds on itself.
Yes, you gotta really take it carefully and think, because your code is going to work exactly how you write it. And if you write it wrong, your computer's never going to interpret the code wrong. It'll always interpret it how you write it.
I think that can be a little bit related on like how an audience reads a piece. You're not entirely sure how they're going to interpret it because in your mind you interpret it one way, the correct way, the way you see it, but when it's actually put out into the world or into your computer for coding, it is interpreted maybe not in the way that you originally intended.
Yeah, it really is like that, where you have an idea and you are trying your best to put it in a way that the computer will understand, and if you mess up a slight way, it'll mess up completely.
Yeah, so because, coding is this complicated and you need to make sure that you're writing it in the correct way, do you ever outline your ideas before putting it into the computer?
Yeah, we'll usually kind of work out what we want in that block of code, and if we get that kind of figured out, we can start building off of that. So we'll put very rudimentary ideas in lines of code, be like, I want this part to do this, and I want the next part to do this, and we'll put little comments in the code itself that will remind us on what we're trying to do with that part, and then it will slowly start to come together.
I feel like that's pretty comparable to sometimes in my drafts, I will put pieces of the outline before each part so I can remind myself what I'm actually intending with any given scene. So if I go back to try and fix things, I have that as a guide. So speaking of fixing problems in code, something I think might be comparable to writing itself is revision. What does the process of revision look like for you within writing code?
Revision is called, we call it debugging, because you're trying to make sure your code is working. And so when you get done with your code and you think is running properly, you do a test run. And the first step, usually in the first place, your code crashes unless you've got it pretty well thought out or have ways that they're called exceptions, which case if your code is going to crash, it will kind of throw out that bad code for a second and will just stop the program or do a certain thing depending if it's like, hey, the code's gonna crash, I need to do this instead. And so we use that to try and find out if there's a problem and that we need to debug it. But otherwise, your code will just not run properly, and then you have to go and kind of look for the problem and why it's not working. It could be code that you thought was doing one thing but is doing another. It could be a small syntax error, which means that the way you wrote it was incorrect and you could be missing something small. Like we use a lot of semicolons at the end of our lines to kind of declare like, hey, this is what you're running. Don't do anything else with it. And if you miss that, it doesn't work, or if you have a space somewhere where it's not supposed to be, it won't work. It just consists of running the code and seeing where the problems are at. And some coding programs are pretty easy and nice and telling you where that problem usually lies.
You mentioned this idea of syntax. Can you explain what syntax looks like in coding? Because in literary writing, we have syntax ourselves. So I just want to see how the two compare, if they're similar or if they're different in any way.
Yeah, syntax is unique to each language. The syntax kind of sets what the language is. Like, each language is unique due to its syntax. And the syntax is how you write certain things. If-else statements, which we use a lot, it gives your program a choice between this option or that option, depending on certain circumstances. The syntax can differ on those. Like in Python, you use just a parentheses and a colon, while in Java, you use parentheses and the squiggly parentheses.
Yeah, I think that's pretty comparable to the English meaning of syntax. So, while semantics is the meaning behind the words and phrases that people use in speaking or writing, syntax is the words themselves. So, when Autumn and I were in our grammar class, that was completely syntax oriented, and we were just learning how the grammar works, how the punctuation works. So it's more the physical manifestation of the words and phrases themselves than the meaning behind it, I suppose. And I feel like that's pretty comparable to the coding definition. So, switching gears a little bit, even though it feels like a totally different world, coding and writing have a lot more overlap than you think.
Right? Whether it's a paragraph or a program, every piece of communication needs clarity, style, and a little bit of voice. So, how do you put your own voice into the things you're coding?
A lot of it is in the way you do stuff. Even though like you have strict syntax on those coding languages, you can do stuff in your own unique way. It's like in the order in which you do stuff is a big way. How efficient you are with your coding is also unique to each person. Some people are more efficient with it than others, and it really shows in their like coding block, as well as kind of like your styling of your code. Like, do you code just to get it to work and don't really care on how it looks, or do you kind of like make it look pretty? Do you like have it so the code block is that of a block instead of just one continuous line? Or do you use proper variable names and stuff so you know what you're looking for in your code?
Yeah, so from my understanding, does this mean that the same output, the same result could be achieved by two coding blocks that look vastly different?
Yes and no. Like, depending on what you need to do, you can get stuff that looks completely different but does get the same output. But there are very specific scenarios in which case you need that if else statement to do it. In which case you'll have that overlap, but even then, each code will look unique to itself unless you are given a very strict guideline on how to do it. Your code is going to look completely unique to you.
Yeah, so going off of that, could you kind of describe your own coding style a little bit for us?
I've never really thought about how I code personally. I mean, it's like writing where you just kind of put it on paper and get it done with. But I guess my coding, I try to make it look neat and makes make sense to someone else looking at it. So if like you have a peer looking at it to kind of make double check it and debug it with you, I try to make it so that way they know what they're looking at by giving proper names to stuff. And we're like, if I've got this number that does this specific thing, I'm going to name it num, whatever its job is, and I try to make it so the code looks at least formal and try to make it so that way it's readable to other people.
That's really interesting. I think oftentimes as writers, we also don't realize that we have our own specific voice and style until we look at the work of others. Because writing, much like coding, is unique to the individual person and comparable, and everyone has their own little quirks to say that they put into their work. So something I often hear about the world of coding is the idea of coders adding little jokes or Easter eggs into the code. Do you do that yet, or do you know of any Easter eggs or jokes that people have put into code?
Um, I'm not like super into that yet because we've done a lot of that strict guideline coding in which you have to do it this way to get the assignment done. But I have done at some point leave little messages for my professor, and some of my code be like, I took a shot at this, hope it works, or something like that. I'll sometimes leave them messages. But Easter eggs in other people's code it's something I haven't seen a lot outside of like video games, really. That's where I see a lot of Easter eggs. Because you kind of just usually the Easter eggs are giving honor to another game or person or game developer outside of it. And they're really cool to see because it's giving that like recognition of it. Or could be a fun little goof inside of the code just to get the player to laugh or something. But I definitely plan on doing Easter eggs in my code just for the fun of it.
It's super awesome. And I think that's almost like when we in writing put allusions, so like references to other pieces of literature into our own works as a sort of nod or even a joke that we're trying to make. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and let's talk about your past life as, not even past, current life as a reluctant English student.
Yeah, because honestly, the scars from book reports and 5 paragraph essays run deep.
We're curious, how did your experiences with writing in school shape how you approach it now?
I'm a lot more, I guess, hateful towards writing because when I did not have the best writing experiences because a lot of teachers kind of just expect you to know how to write properly and be like, "Oh, you can do this. It's easy." And that's one thing coming from the English teacher or professor. It's another coming from the STEM students where strive in more mathematics or sciences rather than that their reading or English counterparts.
Going off of that, do you ever really feel like you had a good support system in learning how to write?
I had a very good English teacher in my high school. She would really help us out individually and work with us to get our papers done and the writing done. And she had the confidence in us that she knew that we could do it, but also that she was willing to help us with it.
So, a lot of times when we're writing in high school, we're writing a wide range of things. Usually, it's those 5 page essays that most students in high school dread. For you, what was the part about writing those that felt the most frustrating?
Probably getting started. I really struggle with trying to find an intro to my papers or even like any of my writing. I don't know how to like start it because then I can get an idea kind of and then I struggle to start that idea as I also struggle with extending my ideas in writing, in which case it goes back to that coding where you want your code to be as efficient as you can possibly get it, so you write it in the simplest terms as possible, and that follows into my writing, and so I can get an idea across as fast as possible in as short as a sentence as I can write. I struggle to also kind of like extend it out and add the fluff to it, if you will.
I feel like there is something to be said, though, about being good with brevity in writing. I know that is something I really struggle with. If I have a word limit, I really struggle to stay under because I just have so much that I want to say. But I feel like a lot of the world outside of the literary appreciates conciseness in writing and clarity. So I wouldn't exactly say that that's a bad thing. Just maybe not the best in certain English classrooms. Not all. Some appreciate it.
What's something that you think would have really helped you get into writing more in high school? What's something that you would have liked to see them change?
It's not a lot of fun when they give you very strict assignments where you're writing for that problem only. Like, write about this paper or write about this book that you read. And it depends on really, like, did I even like that book when I was reading it? If not, why would I like writing this paper? And it's a lot more about the content in which they force down your throat. And it was just not something I enjoyed.
It's really fair.
I feel like I can relate to that a little bit. If I don't feel passionate about what I'm writing about, I have a hard time writing about it. I'm just lucky that, I tend to like most of the things I read for class because that's my deal, but I can't imagine. I feel like it'd be comparable to me having to write lab reports or something. I know I could not get myself to just crank those out.
Of course, we all know that there are some times where you have to write in any job field.
Yeah, whether you're a college student like you are now, or, eventually in a tech position that you are training for, everybody has to write. So we would love to hear some of your strategies for getting through the boring writing that still has to happen to keep everything running smoothly.
A lot of my strategies are really just having something background going, like watching a video or fidgeting with something in my offhand while I'm trying to figure out what I'm writing, whether it be like a professional email or working on like a Google Sheets. But just having some that background item to distract me would probably help a lot, as I use ChatGPT to help guide stuff out. Be like, hey, give me a good format on how to write this email or something.
It's good that you have those tools that you use and you to help motivate you to write because sometimes writing is inevitable. And even though me and Abby are English majors, there are some times where we don't feel like writing something. And so you having these strategies already to help combat some of this writer's block is really good. And I think we commend you on that because I think from our experience, growing up having loved writing and not necessarily having to deal with writer's block or keep pushing through. Sometimes we struggle in the areas now where we aren't as passionate because we've enjoyed writing and therefore we don't have those skills built up to just keep pushing through.
I definitely agree. I remember last year coming into college as a freshman, I didn't have those strategies to push through and do writing I didn't want to do because the majority of writing I got to do in high school was writing that I wanted to do. And just the sheer amount of writing that I think any major has to do in college, but especially English majors. And I'm not gonna lie, there are quite a few things that I don't want to do, like discussion boards. Ugh, worst kind of writing. And so I would just sit there and stare at it or not even open the document. But I think I'm slowly starting to gain those strategies, but I think we can definitely see the difference in background with writing and how that's kind of manifested itself between the three of us. Whether it's crafting an elegant piece of code or shaping a story on the page, the heart of it is all the same: clear communication, creative problem solving, and a structure that holds it all together.
And the creative process, whether it's typing commands or spinning tales, is messy, surprising, and really rewarding.
Huge thanks again to Logan for hanging out with us today and sharing your insights. So that's it for this episode of The Right Angle, where we know the real story is in the process, not the product.
Until next time, write boldly, revise gently, and stay weird.